Hello, Sleepyheads, and welcome back to Yawn and Learn, the channel where your curiosity curls up under a warm blanket and history gently tucks you in. I'm your host, Simone, your bedtime historian, storyteller, and friend who still thinks eyeliner peaked in ancient Egypt. Tonight, we're traveling back over 2,000 years to meet one of the most fascinating, misunderstood, and meme-worthy women in history, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, master of politics, alleged snake enthusiast, and honestly, if she were alive today, she'd probably have more followers than Taylor Swift. Because, think about it, Cleopatra didn't just rule a kingdom, she ruled her own image. She understood optics, alliances, and storytelling better than most modern politicians or influencers. She could turn diplomacy into drama and romance into PR strategy. But before the hashtags, before the scandals, before Hollywood painted her in gold, she was a real person, born into a dynasty full of power struggles, raised in palaces filled with both luxury and danger, and trained to survive a world where one wrong move could mean exile or worse. So tonight, we're peeling back the glittering layers of myth to meet the real woman behind the legend, and to ask a simple question. If Cleopatra lived today, would she still rule the world, or just the algorithm? Born to rule, the making of a queen. Let's rewind to 69 BCE, in the ancient city of Alexandria, a city of marble, mathematics, and more drama than an entire season of Game of Thrones. This was the world into which Cleopatra's seventh Philopater was born, the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Greek rulers who had somehow managed to run Egypt since the days of Alexander the Great. Her family was complicated. Think of them as the Kardashians of the ancient world, if the Kardashians occasionally poisoned each other for the throne. The Ptolemies didn't just believe in keeping power in the family, they took it literally. They married their siblings, schemed against cousins, and ruled with both luxury and paranoia. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, was known for his love of music, wine, and very expensive political mistakes. He was so desperate to stay in power that he bribed Roman politicians with Egypt's fortune, and when that didn't work, he fled into exile. So, Cleopatra grew up in a palace where loyalty was fragile, alliances were bought, and survival meant paying attention. But unlike most royal children, Cleopatra didn't just learn how to look regal, she learned how to think. While her siblings were being groomed for display, Cleopatra was studying languages, politics, mathematics, and philosophy. By her teens, she could reportedly speak 9 languages, including Egyptian, which was rare for her Greek-born family. That meant she could actually talk to her people, not just rule over them. She learned early that power wasn't just about crowns or armies, it was about connection. And when her father died, leaving behind a crumbling economy, a divided court, and several suspicious siblings, Cleopatra, barely 18, was ready to play the most dangerous game in history, keeping the throne. But as we'll see, in ancient Egypt, ruling was never a solo act. It was a balancing act between gods, generals, and, very soon, Romans. The young ruler in a dangerous world. When Cleopatra became queen, Egypt was already in trouble. The economy was collapsing, the Nile's floods had been unpredictable, and Roman influence was spreading faster than gossip at a royal feast. She was supposed to share the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was about 10 years old, and whose advisors immediately decided they didn't like her. A woman with a mind of her own? Fluent in diplomacy, politics, and probably sarcasm? Unacceptable. Before long, palace tensions turned into full-blown war. Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria, not with an army, but with her intelligence. And here's where her story starts to sound less like a tragedy and more like a strategic masterpiece. Because when the Romans arrived, bringing with them Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the known world, Cleopatra didn't beg for help. She staged an entrance. According to legend, she had herself smuggled into Caesar's chambers, rolled up inside a carpet. Yes, a carpet. When the servants unrolled it, out stepped Cleopatra herself, calm, charming, and radiant, with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. In that moment, she didn't just win Caesar's attention, she won Rome's. She framed herself not as a victim needing rescue, but as an equal-seeking alliance. The two soon became partners, politically and, well, otherwise. And with Caesar's backing, Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, defeated her brother's forces, and secured her throne. But let's be clear, this wasn't just a love story. It was public relations before PR existed. Cleopatra turned romance into statecraft, diplomacy into theater, and image into power. She understood something that even modern politicians forget. Sometimes, the story you tell about yourself is more powerful than any army. The goddess of power, image, influence, and the art of control. Cleopatra didn't just rule Egypt, she performed it. Every appearance, every word, every gesture was deliberate. She understood that true power doesn't just sit on a throne. It radiates from how people see you. While most rulers relied on armies, Cleopatra relied on theater. She fashioned herself not as a mere monarch, but as a living goddess, the earthly form of Isis, the divine mother and protector. In a world where gods walked among men, this wasn't arrogance, it was strategy. To her people, she was a sacred bridge between heaven and earth. To Rome, she was a mystery, dangerous, enchanting, and impossible to ignore. Ancient records tell us she had a mesmerizing voice, not necessarily beauty in the Hollywood sense, but presence. When she entered a room, all eyes turned. She used perfume, symbolism, and language like instruments, composing herself into a symphony of authority. When she met Roman officials, she didn't hide her Egyptian identity like previous Ptolemies. She embraced it. She appeared in gilded robes, surrounded by incense, speaking Egyptian, invoking gods and rituals older than Rome itself. It wasn't just spectacle. It was diplomacy through awe. And it worked. For a time, Cleopatra held her kingdom together between two empires, balancing Roman ambition with Egyptian pride, turning potential conquerors into allies. Her reign became less about survival and more about crafting an eternal narrative. You may take my land, but you'll never forget my name. Centuries later, that prophecy still holds true. Love, power, and politics. Cleopatra and Rome. After Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Cleopatra found herself once again standing at the edge of chaos, the kind she knew all too well. Rome was split between rival leaders, and Egypt, as always, was caught in the middle. But Cleopatra wasn't one to wait and see which side would win. She chose Mark Antony, a general, a politician, and a man whose ego could rival a pyramid in size. When Antony summoned her to meet him in Tarsus, Cleopatra didn't simply arrive. She arrived, sailing up the river on a golden barge, sails perfumed, dressed as the goddess Isis herself. She made sure the entire city knew that Egypt still had style. Antony was supposed to be the conqueror, but the moment he saw her, he was conquered instead. What began as politics quickly turned into legend. Together they ruled from Alexandria, lovers, allies, and rivals, to Rome itself. They threw lavish feasts, minted coins with both their faces, and presented themselves as divine rulers of the East. But behind the gold and silk, this was a fragile alliance built on ambition. Rome saw it as decadence, betrayal, even madness. And Rome never forgave extravagance, at least not when it came from a woman. Cleopatra wasn't just a foreign queen anymore. She was an idea. The seductive East, the dangerous other, the woman blamed for corrupting Rome's noble hero. It was the oldest story in politics. When power and femininity meet, history often calls it manipulation. Still, Cleopatra and Antony refused to bow. They built armies, planned for empire, and dreamed of a world not ruled by Rome, but shared between them. It was bold, it was romantic, and it was doomed. Because waiting across the sea was Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, young, calculating, and ready to make the story of Cleopatra and Antony into his greatest propaganda weapon. The fall of a queen, betrayal, war, and the last sunset of Egypt. In 31 BCE, the dream finally broke. Cleopatra and Antony faced Octavian's forces at the Battle of Actium, one of history's most famous naval showdowns. But this wasn't just a clash of ships. It was a clash of stories. Octavian painted himself as Rome's savior, the defender of order against the exotic chaos of the East. And Cleopatra, she became the villain of his narrative, the temptress, the manipulator, the foreign queen who bewitched Rome's noble general. It was brilliant propaganda and devastatingly effective. When Antony's forces faltered, Cleopatra's fleet retreated, and Antony followed. Their armies scattered, their allies fled. By the time they returned to Egypt, their empire of love and ambition had crumbled into rumor. In Alexandria, surrounded by Roman troops, Cleopatra prepared for the inevitable. Octavian offered no mercy, only humiliation. He wanted to drag her through Rome's streets in chains, the living trophy of his triumph. But Cleopatra had no intention of giving him that satisfaction. If history was going to remember her, she would decide how. So, according to legend, she staged her final act. She dressed in her royal robes, lay upon a golden couch, and took her own life, perhaps by a bite from a hidden asp, perhaps by poison. No one knows for sure, but everyone remembers the image, the queen who died as she lived, in control of her own legend. When Octavian entered her chamber, he found her serene, almost smiling. Her empire was gone, but her story was immortal. Antony lay dead beside her, defeated, yes, but still loyal to the end. And Egypt, the last great kingdom of the ancient world, became just another Roman province. Yet even in death, Cleopatra triumphed in a way her conquerors couldn't have imagined. They erased her kingdom, but not her myth. 2,000 years later, we still speak her name, not as a footnote, but as a force. Because the real power of Cleopatra was never in her armies or her lovers. It was in her understanding that a well-told story outlives every empire. The legacy of Cleopatra, between myth and reality. Cleopatra's death didn't end her story, it amplified it. The Romans wrote the first draft, and as usual, they wrote it in their favor. To Octavian, now Augustus, Cleopatra wasn't a queen anymore, she was a warning. He spread tales of her decadence, her manipulation, her fatal beauty. Rome had to believe it hadn't destroyed a noble ruler, only a dangerous seductress. But history is never still. Over the centuries, Cleopatra's image shifted with every civilization that rediscovered her. In the Middle Ages, she was a cautionary tale about pride and lust. In the Renaissance, she became the embodiment of tragic love, the doomed beauty who chose passion over power. By the 19th century, painters and poets transformed her into an exotic muse draped in gold and mystery. And Hollywood? Well, Hollywood gave her eyeliner and a budget. Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra wasn't the scholar who spoke 9 languages or the strategist who rebuilt an empire. She was the queen of spectacle, and, in a way, that's exactly what Cleopatra herself had always been. Even when her power was gone, her storytelling never stopped working. It evolved, it adapted, it survived. Modern historians now try to peel away the myths, revealing a more complex woman beneath. Not a temptress, but a polyglot intellectual who governed during impossible times. A woman who used every tool available, beauty, politics, theater, language, to protect her people in a world built to erase her. Cleopatra's real legacy isn't in how she died, but in how she refused to vanish. She became the queen of reinvention, living proof that history belongs not to the victors, but to those who remain unforgettable. And maybe that's why she still feels strangely modern. In a world obsessed with image, perception, and power, Cleopatra would fit right in. After all, she invented the concept of the personal brand 2,000 years before Instagram. If Cleopatra lived today. So, what if Cleopatra didn't die on that golden couch? What if she woke up one morning, still ambitious, still brilliant, but in our world? First, forget pyramids. Cleopatra would run an empire of influence. She'd have a verified account before most of us finish breakfast. Her profile? Pharaoh, polyglot, queen of branding, DM for alliances. Her barge would be replaced by a private jet wrapped in gold foil, and every arrival would be live-streamed to millions. She wouldn't need priests to announce her divinity, just an algorithm. Instead of Rome, she'd face the modern empires, global corporations, social media, politics. And just like 2,000 years ago, she'd know exactly how to make them all compete for her favor. Julius Caesar? Probably a Silicon Valley CEO. Mark Antony? A movie star turned activist tweeting poetry about her at 2 a.m. Cleopatra would never be just a celebrity. She'd be a movement, a fusion of intellect, charisma, and strategy. She'd launch education programs, fashion lines, maybe even an ISIS AI startup. Ancient wisdom, modern marketing. And every critic calling her manipulative or too ambitious? She'd repost them with a wink emoji and keep ruling anyway. Because that's what she's always done. She reshaped power by turning perception into weaponry, and today perception is power. It's strange, isn't it? We've built a world of screens and stories, likes and legends, and somehow Cleopatra still fits. She was the first to understand what it means to live in both reality and narrative. To rule not just through force, but through fascination. So maybe Cleopatra never really died. She just changed platforms. The end that never ends. And that, Sleepyheads, brings us to the end, or maybe just another beginning. We've followed Cleopatra through the rise and fall of empires, through love, loss, and legacy. And somehow, her story still feels alive, reshaped by every century that tries to understand her. So as you close your eyes tonight, remember, history isn't just about what was. It's about what still echoes. The people who refused to fade. The stories that keep whispering, not yet. If this journey left you a little more curious and a little more awake than you planned, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more sleepy stories and strange corners of history. It helps the channel and keeps our little library of dreams growing. Until next time, Fluff your pillow, dim the lights, and dream gently through history. Good night, sleepyheads. This is Yawn and Learn,